5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
It's how I roll, a shooting star in a film noir. I'm floating around 10 feet on the ground. I'm floating around 10 feet on the ground.
Hey there, hello. Welcome to the closing episode of Grasping Sasquatch. This is Dr. John Baranchuk coming at you for the last time on this show. If you're not familiar with our format, please post all questions in caps. Try and answer them as I go. Conversations amongst yourself. Lower caps. Please like and subscribe. The Untold Radio Network has a lot of excellent shows on Bigfoot, and you can benefit from watching and learning from them as well. I guess out of the gates, I want to thank Alex and Doug Hajicek for this incredible opportunity and platform. I want to thank all the boards that allowed me to advertise this show. They're advertised on about 50 of them. You guys have been awesome, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate y'all. And most importantly, thanks to all my viewers, both regular and new ones. It's been an awesome time for me. Thanks for all the birthday wishes. As I said on Facebook, another year older and another day wiser. Other than that, I'm not going to start with a story this week. Just going to jump in to a summary of the show. As I said, please do not hesitate to ask questions as we go. And away we go. We're going to just hit the highlights, if I can remember them, of each show. Starting with the first, as a tribute to my social media and technical ineptness, I don't have all my JPEG, they're called thumbnails, to every show because I've unfortunately saved over some, but all 35 shows are out there and available to review. But some of them I don't have the JPEG. for. So, this book originally, the original name of this book, before I self-published it, was Bigfoot Prep, a primer for psychologic, scientific Bigfoot fieldwork. And from there, it got changed to Psychological Horizons in Scientific Bigfoot Research, which continues to be available on Amazon. And soon to come, the new and improved version of that same book, entitled Grasping Sasquatch, published by Hanger Publication. Thank you again, Doug and Alex. And that's to be released in the near future. Unlike the one on Amazon, it will have all the bells and whistles that Doug includes in his publications. There'll be, I forget the name of the codes, those big square barcode codes that you can scan into your computer. That will take you to the source material so you can view it directly, as well as look directly at pictures and so on and so forth. So it's kind of a high-tech version of the original version. But to get back to the point, originally this was written as a preparatory textbook, if you will, to assist people who are interested in learning on things they can do to help with their fight-flight response and emotional reactions to Bigfoot encounters, and prepare them and give them an overview of the scientific knowledge necessary to conduct quantitative experimental research. So that was the inspiration for the book, and remains the goal of the book, because I don't think we've got to kill one. If we kill one, we got to kill a second one for confirmatory reasons, maybe even two. We can do it with using true quantitative, statistically driven, hypothesis driven research, if we are willing to shift our research model. We're halfway home in that we're already studying phenomena, and psychological science similarly studies phenomena, emotions, thoughts, intellect, that you can't directly measure. You can measure the behavioral results of those factors, but you can't tap into somebody's brain with a wire and directly measure their intelligence or their emotions and things of that nature. Psychological science is particularly well suited to investigate Bigfoot, because like we did with humans, we can investigate Bigfoot behavior and statistically analyze it, take out a lot of the inherent error. It's not in caps, but good question, so I'm going to put it up. I believe. I hope I haven't butchered your name. Why are you signing off? I'm signing off because this aspect of my work is done. Doug was nice enough to give me a platform to do a podcast that covered my book. Last week's show was from chapter 11 in my book, which is the last chapter in my book. So this aspect of my work with this book and with my ideas on bringing science to Bigfoot, this aspect of it is done. which is why I'm signing off. Hope to get invited to some conferences. Hope to do some interviews. I'm going to have to be promoting my book. So I'm not planning on dropping out of the picture, but kind of focusing those energies on promoting the book and hopefully getting some conference gigs. Both the small ones and the big ones seem to be booked up into 2005, through 2005 almost. So we'll see if I get any invitations towards the end of 2005, beginning of 2006. But back to the book. Thank you for that question. Back to the book. The book starts, well, the show started out. We pulled out our big guns to begin with episodes 1, 2, dealing with anxiety and fear. 3, fight flight, dealing with anxiety and fear. 4, 5, 6, and thought it was getting kind of fight flight heavy, emotionally heavy. So we kind of took a departure and then came back to fight flight. I forget. We'll run into that episode on down the line. But why in the world did I include fight flight and in these episodes teach people to relax, teach people self-hypnosis, teach people guided imagery, and most importantly, learning a skill called stress inoculation, which literally allows you to begin to learn to modulate and control your fight-flight response. Our fight-flight response is hardwired into our body through our autonomic nervous system, and 99.9% of the time is not under voluntary control. Strictly by accident, a psychologist discovered that when people relax, they can gain auditory control of their sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, which are the two divisions of the autonomic nervous system responsible for fight flight. Simply by relaxing, you can begin to modulate the fight flight response. But for those who really want to kind of reprogram your fight flight response, I first recommend learning to do some deep breathing and relaxation. And that was there are episodes about that on the front end, how to do that. In the book, there are lengthy scripts, and I walk you step by step through how to do that. And eventually we do move on to, and I take you step by step through stress inoculation, which allows you, again, while you're relaxing, to begin reprogramming that response so that you can remain calmer and not lose your poop or pee, literally and figuratively, if you have a close-up Class A encounter, if you don't want to. It's not a magical process. Takes some time. If you want to recondition your fight-flight response so you can remain calmer in the face of a Class A encounter, close-up Class A encounter, as far as that goes, you're going to want to give it a couple months. It's going to be about 3 weeks to learn to get good and relaxed and stay good and relaxed, and then another 2 weeks probably continuing relaxation while you're making out your stress inoculation hierarchy. And then you begin to work through that list, starting with the weakest and least evocative or least provocative image. And you learn to relax through that entire mental movie. As you're running that mental movie, your relaxation, you feel tension coming on, your relaxation deteriorates. You stop the mental movie, use your relaxation to relax back down, and pick up the mental movie where you left off. Some people say where you were just before you stopped or left off. You continue to run that fantasy or daydream or imaginary scenario from where you left off, and continue to run it until you either reach the natural conclusion of that imaginary experience or until it affects your relaxation again. If it affects your relaxation again, you relax back down to your previous level and pick up where you left off again until you can run that entire mental movie of the least evocative, least anxiety or fear provoking Bigfoot experience. Once you can run that scenario through and stay completely calm and relaxed without it interfering with your relaxation, running the movie interfering with your relaxation. Once you can run that mental movie or daydream or whatever you want to call it through 3 consecutive times in a row without becoming more anxious, you then move on to the second most evocative and rinse and repeat. And you keep doing that until you get into your more frightening and traumatizing ones, and you continue on your way along those lines. Jennifer's got a good question. Jennifer Arnold, nice to see you here. Thank you for your presence. And boy, at least I forget. Mark Ledford, thanks for coming. ASPA 60, thanks for coming. Thanks for your participation. Thanks for being here. Hands, AAO, Pyromedic, Susan Lawrence, Jennifer Arnold, my. I feel like I'm pronouncing that like the fish, and I apologize again. 7th of the 7th, Can Squatch. Let's see. Dr. David Mitchell, thank you, buddy. Thank you all. So how do you relax when you are face to face with the big hairy guy? Excuse me. So staying relaxed when you're face to face with the big hairy guy may not be your best option. And so the idea in learning to relax, to reprogram your fight flight response, is just the first step to recondition your autonomic nervous system. You got the parasympathetic, which is the fight or flee response. And then you got the parasympathetic nervous system, which is kind of like the off switch in the calming response. So you've got to get good at that, at using your relaxation and your self-modulation abilities to stay relaxed throughout those mental movies during that stress inoculation process. That's where the relaxation comes in. After that, and in my book, and I think I did a show on it as well, once you can stay relaxed, then the next step is to and is outlined in the book, and I think I talked a little bit about it on these shows. The next step is to modulate your response in the face of a Bigfoot. Being all relaxed and limp and loose probably isn't the best place to be when you're pretty close and up close with a Bigfoot. You want to have some arousal. You want some muscle tension. You want to be able to stay emotionally calm, but physically alert and ready to react. And so, after you've inoculated yourself through the stress inoculation, that's where the guided imagery, that's where the self hypnosis can come in to modulate your response in an appropriate fashion. In its simplest form, guided imagery can be used, getting relaxed, and then either, well, to start with, seeing yourself in that situation and going through possible encounter scenarios. Who knows how it's going to happen? But just going through possible encounter scenarios, and how you're going to react in those scenarios will begin to pre-program you behaviorally for when that actually occurs. And when I do this with myself, I typically, one of the first things that I do is, I see myself with a bowed head towards the creature, and I get cover. I find either some rock or some tree, slowly move towards that. You don't have to do it my way. The point is, you need to think through and think about how you want to respond in these situations and begin visualizing that first as if you're watching yourself go through it. And once you're comfortable watching yourself go through it, then begin to visualize that happening. Excuse me. Then begin to visualize that happening through your own eyes, not where you're up, kind of watching yourself going through this, but actually being in your own body and seeing this through your own eyes as if it's actually happening, and making those moves and doing those things in in that visualization. And so I think that answers your question, that we're not looking for a relaxed state in these encounters. We're using the relaxation to gain control over our fight flight response, our autonomic nervous system. And relaxation is the key to open that door to gain some control and modulation abilities of it, through the relaxation, through the stress inoculation. Once you've done that, you got to go another step further and begin to, program what kind of response you do want to make, and what moves you may want to make and how you want to respond. And so that's not going to be done in a relaxed state if it happens. And so you don't even want to visualize yourself in a relaxed state in those situations. You want to visualize yourself as you'd like to react. I hope that answers your question, Jennifer. Where are you there? Jason Miller, thank you, bud. And you asked a good question. What if it's a peaceful encounter, interacting with one less than 30 feet away? Still don't think it would hurt to, well, and through your training as a medic and, your own personal experiences, that, it can still be beneficial to have a handle on your fight-flight response so you don't have a knee-jerk reaction, because that kicks in involuntarily. You don't say, okay, kick in fight-flight. It's under automatic programming. It's under automatic control. And so, one, I still don't think it would hurt to recondition your fight-flight response. But if you're having these peaceful encounters, when you program how you're going to respond in them appropriately. If it's a friendly, peaceful interaction, visualize how you'd like that to go. And I'm still suggesting the fight, flight, and the response programming. Again, not because I don't think you could handle it, but because, again, this reaction is under automatic control. And it's possible, even in a peaceful encounter where you want to be calm, a panic attack, anxiety, still could happen to you involuntarily and destroy or impact that peaceful encounter. So I'd advise still working on reprogramming your fight-flight response. But enjoy the peaceful encounter, of course. Why not? If you can create an alliance, as I know some people say they have, go for it. You also make the good point that not all encounters are fear-provoking or traumatic. Even when not, however, even excitement is a step towards the fight-flight response. You get eager, you get excited, you get anxious, not in the anxiety, not from an anxiety perspective, but maybe even from an eagerness perspective. That's associated with physiologic arousal, again, which kind of underscores why I think it may be a good idea, even in those situations, to do some reprogramming for yourself. Thanks, Jason. Nice to see you here. There we go. There we go. And so the book goes into quite a bit of detail. There's scripts on how to do deep breathing. There's scripts on how to do progressive relaxation, autogenic relaxation, stress inoculation, visualization, self-hypnosis, all spelled out. Literally, you can go to the appendices, and I've written scripts out that you can read out loud and into a recorder, and then use that recording to practice your own relaxation or develop your own stress inoculation script. Aside from your own welfare, the welfare of our research and why it's in what was supposed to be a preparatory field manual, if you will. It's kind of heavy for a field manual. But we've got to prepare ourselves emotionally as well. I think it's going to be a while before somebody latches onto my ideas for science and creates some movement in the field. So until that happens, we're still kind of stuck in this mire of this naturalistic observational research. And it's not that that's just a terrible thing. It's just that it hasn't gotten us anywhere in 60 years. But that's likely to continue, I suspect. And it relies heavily on observational abilities, objective observational abilities, and objective reporting abilities. If you're in the throes of a fight-flight reaction when you have a Bigfoot encounter, let me tell you, objectivity goes out the window. When a fight-flight reaction or response happens, again, it's an automatic, not thinking thing that overtakes your being, basically. And so when fight-flight responses, or even if your arousal doesn't increase to the point of a full-blown fight-flight response, the increasing anxiety, the increasing anticipation, that builds physiological arousal in our nervous system. And that physiological arousal clouds our judgment, clouds our ability to be objective, clouds our ability to objectively report without unintentionally embellishing because you're still caught up in the emotion of it all. And so, having a skill to be able to modulate or prevent that fight-flight response and programming in some appropriate responses that fit with your own research goals and your own aspirations will allow you to continue to be a more objective observer and a more objective reporter. And especially given what can happen, I think you're well prepared. George Wrigley, I didn't see you come in. I see David saying hello to you. George Wrigley. Oh, you a lot, buddy. I didn't think this was going to be this hard. George is one of my mentors. And I learned a lot about Bigfoot from George and many other fine people, starting with my first expedition. So it's awesome to see him here, even though I don't see you here, George. But thank you for coming. George was involved, if you followed this series, George was involved in the possible bluff charge that initially we thought was a landslide. He was 1 in 4 in my group when we heard that thunderous tree break, and then thought a landslide was coming down on top of us. No rocks, no trees, nothing. Nothing reached the roadbed except a big cloud of loam dust. It was a butt-puckering experience. George and I were kind of just starting a new conversation or following up in a conversation. And so we jumped and scrambled like cockroaches, as did Mark Oakleby, who was on the backside of the single file line we were using. And Dan Kegley, excuse me, who, because of this incident, I fondly named Braveheart. While we're scrambling like cockroaches, George Kegley spins on his heel, reaches down for his K-bar knife and is looking up the hill to take on what's ever coming at us. I'm sorry, guys. Fond memories. Scary ones, too. On the way down, we tried for 30 minutes to debunk that. Couldn't do it. I don't know, 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe. George has a 14-second recording of the landslide. And, when you're in it, or the landslide sound, I should say, when you're in it, it seems a lot longer than 14 seconds. But it was that landsliding sound, which, I'm beginning to lean towards a possible versus probable bluff charge. Seemed to take forever. But we couldn't figure it out. So we started walking back down the fire road. And as we're walking down the fire road, the walkie-talkie goes up. And the guys, there was a group at this cabin, which was midway up the mountain. And that kind of served as our base camp away from base camp. And they radioed up to us. They said, "Are you walking on the fire road or are you walking down the steep path to the cabin?" "We're walking on the fire road." "Oh, okay." So it was probably another couple 300 yards from where this happened to this steep deer trail down the face of this hill to get to the cabin, where I think we were the last in. There were probably -4, 12 other people waiting down there for us. And as we're heading down this slippery, slidey, muddy deer trail, down this steep slope, the walkie-talkie goes off again. What are you calling us for? "Are you on the fire road or are you on the deer trail?" "We're on the deer trail coming down. Why do you keep calling us?" "Well, when you're on the fire road, there were red lights pacing you several yards behind you, but you were being followed. And now that you're on the deer trail, there are red lights behind you now." So, of course, we all pivoted and looked up the hill and couldn't see anything. We got down to the cabin, and I don't know how long we were there, maybe 5 minutes before, in the area around the deer trail that we just came down, we began to see red-eyed peepers. You'd see an eye or eye glow peep out from behind a tree and then peep back behind the tree, and then the other side. And this wasn't just happening behind one tree. This was happening behind, I don't know. It was tough to count and keep track. I would estimate between 15 or 20 trees. This was all going on at the same time. And we stood there for about 20 minutes, all 15 or 16 of us watching this happen. And so that's an experience George and I shared. Excuse me again. The point being, ironically, as emotional as I am right now, you want to modulate your emotional responses and be able to be objective. Um, I laid it out in these 9 episodes, 6 of which you've seen so far, I've gone over so far, and it's outlined in the book. Good skill to have. Then we moved on to infrasound to begin to mix it up. And a scientific investigation of infrasound for 2 shows. And in this show and in this book, in my book, in this chapter, I outline how if we had proper funding, tomorrow we could do a laboratory experiment on infrasound with a placebo control group to provide data and begin to provide insight into, is it the infrasound doing it? Is it literally the physical effects, which are well documented, of infrasound on the body, on the organs, because that low vibration, that low of a vibration consistent with infrasound can, if it goes on long enough, can mess with your organs. They're finding it a problem with truck drivers because the engine, the combination of the engine, drone, and the road actually end up producing infrasound, and it can become a health problem for truckers. So in this study that I talked about, we could look at, is it physically the infrasound, or is it the presence, just the threat, or the presence of being in this apex, in the presence of this apex creature, or is it us doing it to ourselves? And that's why the control group is so important. And this study could be conducted, like with proper funding, could be conducted tomorrow to see if infrasound, if it's making us sick, if the threat of the Bigfoot is making us sick, or if we're making ourselves sick through our emotional responses. And I think it would be interesting to investigate, and who knows what will be revealed when Doug releases Sasquatch Meets Science 2. But part of the point being, you don't even have to have a Bigfoot to do Bigfoot research. I believe the Sierra Sounds have been certified for infrasound, and the Ohio calls have been certified for infrasound already. If you're not too keen or not too stuck on it being Bigfoot infrasound, elephant trumpets, elephant roars sound uncannily like Bigfoot, to me at least, and also oftentimes include infrasound. Elephants can communicate 10 miles between themselves with infrasound. The infrasound goes into the ground and travels underground 10 miles. Talk about force and strength. And the herd picks up that communication through the pads of their feet. They pick up the infrasound through the pads of their feet. And they got to rotate elephant keepers out on a regular basis because even with friendly animals, just trumpeting and roaring and producing that infrasound tends to make them sick when they tend to elephants for too long. So I think it's like every month or every 2 months, they got to rotate out of the elephant pens and somebody new's got to rotate back in um, to uh, do the chore so the other folks don't get sick. Christopher Noel, around the time of this show, him and I were in contact. And if you're not familiar with him, he's a big name in Bigfooting and big name in paranormal. And he shared with me that he believes it's not even infrasound. He believes it's electromagnetic fields that are producing that sickness and some of the other symptoms associated with that. Yet, Dave, I'm pretty sure they are have identified the infrasound in those. But the placebo control group in this study would be listening to the roar, be it of a Bigfoot or an elephant roar masking as a Bigfoot, but you can edit out the infrasound so that the subject is not being exposed to the infrasound, only the roar. And you can look at the differences in the physiologic responses and stress blood work levels, cortisol levels, for example. You could draw blood and look at blood work and see, is it the roar with the infrasound in it that's creating these changes? Or is it the roar without the infrasound in it? So, anyways, enough on that. Scientific Sasquatch story BS detector. So this I drew. This is actually not in the book, but was inspired by some things that were going on apparently in the internet. Um, but so this is not in the book. I drew from my background and training in neuro-linguistic programming, whereby watching eye movements, asking people certain questions, and watching their eye movements tells you about how they're processing information and whether they're creating a story or whether they're remembering a story. And of course, if somebody's creating a story but telling you this is something that they experienced, we then begin to get a little more skeptical about what we're being told. Because if they experienced it, they should be able to remember it. They shouldn't have to construct it in response to your questions. I think the forewarning here is you got to take some time to get good at this. If you're going to use this as a BS detector and be truly objective and diagnostic, you've got to first ask the person a series of questions that tap either into visual memories, auditory memories, or body memories. And the questions need to be pure in the sense of the sensory modality you're asking about. And you watch how people process. If you ask them about a color, you watch how people's eyes move as they process that question. And by asking a series of questions about colors, smells, sounds, and feelings, you create a baseline and you begin to get a sense for their normal processing. And you confirm that when they're looking up and to the right, they're remembering. And when they're looking up and to the left, they're constructing. And you got to go through that. You got to make sure they're responding typically, because not everybody responds in that same way. Our brains aren't all wired in the same way. And so you got to go through kind of a baseline series of questionings to assess how they process relatively clean questions and information, to know for sure whether they're constructing something, which leads to concerns about lying or BSing, or whether they're remembering something. Jennifer, do you know if any audio computer software can identify infrasound? Oh, I'm going to block on the big names in audio analysis. I think David Ellis is one of them. I'm blocking on the name of the other gentleman that analyzes audio. I know some people that do it on a pseudo-professional basis as a Bigfooter, rather than these two guys, who, as I believe it, are recording experts. Scott Nelson, thank you, Pine Island Research, very much. Scott Nelson was, I believe he's a linguist who has looked at recordings. And they may probably have more sophisticated equipment, but to my understanding, Jennifer, friends who do this, they use the free downloadable Audacity graphics program and are able to identify infrasound using that program. It's a free download. I think the key here, however, part of it's a playback system that shows you a graphic representation of the frequencies of the sounds you're hearing. But I think a more important aspect is spending your money on some custom microphones. I think Monongahela still makes some, and I'm blocking on the other name that I learned early on in my Bigfooting that makes hand-built custom microphones, because you got to have a very sensitive microphone that picks up on a wide spectrum of sound frequencies. And that's the tool that ultimately is going to capture the infrasound if it's there. So you need to spend the money on the microphone. And people I know that are doing this kind of stuff, free download of Audacity, and then they run their recordings through Audacity and look at the lower frequencies real close, because that's where infrasound is going to come. Hey, Craig, buddy. All right. I hope that answers your question. And if I don't answer your questions, please repeat them. Sometimes I miss them as well. And I skipped Carolina Puerto. I wanted to say hello to Carolina Puerto. Carolina was my research assistant when I was doing my dissertation down in Mexico. She was on my translation team. I took an imagery. I've always been interested in hypnosis and imagery, and I took the Betts questionnaire upon mental imagery, which measures your imaging abilities in your verbal, visual, auditory, gustatory, and kinesthetic realms, and looks for your strengths. And so I had that translated. I had 6 bilinguals translate that English version into a Spanish version. Then I had 6 other bilinguals take that Spanish version and translate it back to an English version. And then we did a statistical analysis on the 2 English versions, an original version as well as the translated version, and compared question to question. We looked at the correlations in the responses between those questions, and it showed us that we created a statistically and linguistically equivalent Spanish version of the Betts questionnaire upon mental imagery. Then we gave it, Carolina was instrumental. In 2 weeks, I gathered, because of Carolina, in 2 weeks, I gathered 500 Mexican subjects worth of data. They were given an English version and a Spanish, not to mention bilingual subjects. They were given the English version and the Spanish version of this test. And then I gave those 2 tests to 500 bilingual students in America. What took 2 weeks in Mexico to accomplish through Carolina's interventions and assistance took a full year to accomplish in the United States. The Mexican people are great people. I miss the culture. Any questions about the BS detector? Let's see, next slide. Ooh. So then we did 2 shows. Boy, I may have to pick up the pace here. Then we did 2 shows on minimizing bias in Sasquatch research. I talked about the different types of confirmation bias, or different types of bias, including confirmation bias, experimental bias, and a bias term that I believe I created, which I think is a very important one to understand, and that's organismic bias. The take-home message here is our autonomic nervous system, the same nervous system that controls our fight-flight responses, unless we learn to reprogram those. Our autonomic nervous system is part of our sensory perceptual nervous system. And when you reach down into the fire and pick up a burning stick, the milliseconds it takes for that signal to get from your hands to your brain, that's sensation. The millisecond it hits your brain, that begins perception. And our perception is informed and influenced by our life, by our life history, by what we've learned, by how we've been treated. It's not objective. Our perception is informed by our history. And because we all have any history, our perception is prone and hardwired towards bias. And that's probably one of the most important points of the book, I think. You cannot be objective, guys. I don't care how hard you try in your observational research. We're hardwired to be biased, and that's why using an experimental design with control variables and statistical analyses to control for error are so important. It takes out the confirmation bias. It takes out the error bias. It takes out other things mimicking the creature through the experimental design. We take those things out of the picture. So organismic bias is important, real important, to understand that we've all got it. And these shows also went into topics like illusions. Last night I was on a show, I had the honor to appear on Nikki Colin's show, and we talked about pareidolia. And I had a very interesting question. Somebody asked me, do I think pareidolia explains other cryptids? I think my response on the air was that I think that pareidolia can happen with any cryptid, but just because you experience pareidolia related to that cryptid doesn't mean that cryptid doesn't mean that that cryptid doesn't exist. I think the important thing to understand is pareidolia isn't out there in the tree line. Pareidolia happens in here, in our brain, when we look at the patterns in that tree line. It's a ink blot test for Bigfoot. And we got to be careful about how much pareidolia we interpret as Bigfoot, because that then ends up leading to misidentification, weakens our database, and weakens our power to do the research. But understand that pareidolia doesn't happen in the tree line. It happens in your brain when you look at the tree line. You see something that doesn't fit or something that's out of sorts. That creates cognitive dissonance that we've got to resolve, and pareidolia helps us do that. We create the pareidolia, not the tree line. And there's other things. Be aware that there's auditory pareidolia. Slept my first night near a drainage culvert, and I swore people were talking and whispering about me till I stepped out to see who it was, and it was a drainage culvert. So all types of pareidolia exist. Well, not all types, but visual and auditory pareidolia exist. It can confuse as to whether your Bigfoot you're hearing is on your right, your left, whether there's 2 or 3 or 4 Bigfoots, or are they surrounding us. All these are for specific types of pareidolia, auditory illusions, if you will. And Sasquatch Medic adds sensory as well. Yes, thank you. Just a bit of trivia. Being a pain psychologist and a neuropsychologist, for the longest time until I started in that field, I didn't know that there are physical hallucinations. There are people out there that, as part of their mental health disorder and condition, they hallucinate pain. That's just fascinating to me. Then we went over the BFRO classification system and using those as guides for objectivity. They're out there. I think we should use them. I think we should regularly review them, especially after we have an encounter or before we go out in the hopes of having an encounter, to correctly identify the type of encounter we have so we're speaking the same language. Tree structures and experimental design. Again, one of the things that's unique about psychological science and psychological experimentation is we can isolate the influence of the humans from the influence of the Bigfoot. And in this show, I talked about how you could use tree structures. Go to an area where you know there are Bigfoot making tree structures. And then a good distance away from them, in a human location, you find an area about the same size, put up a tree structure like one of the tree structures you saw at the Bigfoot area, and see how many tree structures get constructed. Who constructs the more tree structures in that place? You monitor the number of tree structures built in the human area. You monitor the number of tree structures added onto or built in the Bigfoot area. Do a statistical analysis between those two to see which areas produced the most tree structures. If it's in the Bigfoot area, you're tapping into the Bigfoot, you're tapping into the Bigfoot influence area, the Bigfoot behavior area. If you're counting the tree structures in the human area away from Bigfoot, now you're tapping into the influence of humans. So you can compare the human influence in making tree structures to the Bigfoot influence of making tree structures, and lend scientific support to Bigfoot. That Bigfoot is out there making the tree structures, not the humans. Can legal concepts of evidence be applied to Sasquatch? Basically just went down over all the different types of evidence within the legal system, and then talked about how they might be relevant to the Bigfoot research field. Of course, and I don't remember the name of the first person I pissed off once I started doing this show. But on a post away from the show, I tried to explain why a Class A encounter does not constitute scientific evidence. And this person lost their mind and could not understand why firsthand encounters get reduced down to anecdotes. And although anecdotal evidence in legal cases, witness testimony is allowed, within the scientific community, anecdotal evidence is simply considered the weakest evidence out there. And that's part of the reason why we need to shift our research model, because the research that continues to go on, it's formed a foundation for scientific research, but it's not going to move us into scientific research unless we start experimentation and statistical analysis. And I won't get on that high horse again. I'm not saying people's Class A experiences didn't happen. I'm not saying people's Class A experiences aren't of value. Science doesn't value them. Science values experimentation and numbers, and thus my bias. Anecdotal evidence, trace evidence. Footprints would be considered trace evidence. All those concepts apply, and I think we would do well to look closely at them and think about the implications of those types of evidence and how they're used in the legal system compared to how science uses those types of evidence. I keep cycling on a point that I want to make, and it keeps slipping by. Can concepts of evidence be applied to Sasquatch? Oh, I think one of the take-home messages from this show is you need to understand that in a court of law, you only need to tip the scales to 51% to be found innocent. 51% is innocent. In science, if you want statistical validity for your research, it can't be 50% chance of error, or 49% chance of error. It's got to be a 95% chance of ruling out error. So there's a higher standard in science. The bar is set higher in science than it is in court. Yes, Ben, beyond a reasonable doubt, absolutely. Can Sasquatch encounters cause PTSD? The answer is yes. The longer you let it fester, the stronger it will get, and it will begin to spread to other areas of your life, not just a Bigfoot encounter. And gradually it'll spread and spread and spread until it's uncomfortable to get out of the house. So if you experience PTSD in response to a Bigfoot encounter, don't sit on it. Don't hold it in. Find somebody you can talk to about it, and somebody who can help you learn to cope with those involuntary emotions and involuntary physical symptoms that come along with PTSD. It's real, folks. PTSD in response to Bigfoot encounters is real. And then we came back to the topic of reprogramming fight-flight. Taught you the steps of self-hypnosis. Again, those are in the book, as well as with a hypnotic induction script you can read into your recorder. Hypnotic age regression and NLP for encounters. This is where I also covered a program. Fight-flight response reprogramming measure called the swish pattern. Walked you through that. I think for that show we actually together walked ourselves through that swish pattern. And other neurolinguistic age regression. Doing age regression. Which age regression is a hypnotic technique. And it can help people who have dealt or are dealing with PTSD, be it from a Bigfoot encounter or any other encounter. Any questions so far? We're getting through the slides pretty quick. I didn't see any questions in caps, please, so they're easy for me to find. Hey, Jessica, how are you, girl? Nice to see you. So again, it's in the book. I'm not going to walk you through all the steps of self-hypnosis. I'm not going to walk you through the steps of the swish pattern. They're there for you to use. Yes, Santa Claus, I believe. Yes, there is a Santa Claus, and I believe in Sasquatch. This is chapter 1 in the book. Ended up on episode 20 in the series. The main point is I believe in Sasquatch, and I believe in Sasquatch because of other people's experiences, as well as my own personal experiences in the woods. Anyone who goes onto a website and says Sasquatch doesn't exist having never stepped in the woods to look for Sasquatch, they have no business there. You got to get out in the woods if you have any chance of having an encounter. And there are reasons. There's plenty of reasons. Be they stories, be they footprints, be they video. There's plenty of evidence. Most of it's very weak evidence, but there's plenty of evidence out there. Follow the scientific method for scientific results. It seems so freaking obvious that it's kind of scary that I had to do a show on it. You know, we covered the steps of the scientific method in this show, but, you know, what is the goal here? You know, if you're not in it just for your own edification, the other major reason to be into Bigfoot is to help the species, help scientifically prove the species exists. So we're trying to scientifically prove the species exist, but we're using only an observational science filled with potential error and bias, filled with a lack of not completing the scientific method. Right now, the standard of research for an expedition, go out there, have your experience, write up your encounter in your notebook, discuss it in debriefing, and that's about as far as it goes. We're not set up to statistically analyze the data because we don't know how to design experiments. And I think in terms of the future of Bigfoot, those are the two big obstacles to accomplish any kind of true quantitative Bigfoot research. Somebody's got to bite, a lot of people got to bite the bullet and learn how to do statistics, learn how to do experimental design so you can actually do an experiment on the Bigfoot phenomena rather than just observing them. And again, I've already briefly alluded to two of the experiments that are in my book. A third one is a tree knock study, similar to the tree structure study. We got to be doing experimentation. We got to be analyzing numeric data because those are the languages of science. We're trying to scientifically prove something exists. Seems like a pretty good idea to me to use the language of science, which is experimentation and numbers. Follow the scientific method to the end, which is peer review, publication, repetition. Garbage in, garbage out. Statistical analysis, crap data in, crap out. It's happening in the dog industry too. Yeah. You're only as good as your data that you gather, and you don't want to be gathering misidentifications to beat that horse to death. That was a 2-show series. Are most Bigfoot photos scientifically worthless or ... This is an easy one. Any Bigfoot photo taken with the sole purpose of trying to capture an image of Bigfoot is scientifically worthless. I hate to break it to you guys. I did a little rant on a thread the other day. You know, we're being sold the latest and greatest FLIR cameras. We're being sold the latest and greatest drones. All this high tech stuff. all these high-tech photo techniques, they're worthless. Why are they worthless? One, they don't prove a thing. They're not reality. They're a representation of reality. And they're a representation of reality that can be easily manipulated as we move into the age of AI. But they could easily be manipulated even before that. So they're not a reliable scientific measure. And everybody who's serious about Bigfoot knows it, because what lesson did we learn from the Big Patterson Gimlin film? A live film of the creature isn't enough. Eyewitness testimony of the creature corresponding to that live film isn't enough. Films of the footprints aren't enough. Films of the casts aren't enough. Authentication of the casts aren't enough. Or we'd have proven Bigfoot exists by now, scientifically. So spend your money on your high-tech cameras and video if you want. Just don't delude yourself into thinking that by taking a picture, you're going to be the one to capture the image of Bigfoot that proves Bigfoot exists. It simply will not happen. What's the solution? The solution is use your photos within the broader context of an experimental design. Somewhere along the line, I talked about the Tag 7 study. And I think the most serious criticism, or one of the most serious criticisms I can make of those folks, I think it was an awesome study, but something as simple as a recorder, audio recorder even, near the tags, or a well-hidden continuous video recorder without an infrared trigger could have provided additional evidence that it was Bigfoot that they were tagged. Photos have a place in Sasquatch scientific research. We just got to get out of our head that they constitute the research and results themselves. So if you want a scientifically sound photo, start designing experiments in your research that uses a photograph to provide confirmatory evidence. Then that photograph is going to be scientific and it's going to have some value. I went on for 2 shows about that. Sasquatch reporting accuracy tutorial. Boy, I don't even remember this show. Reporting accuracy tutorial. I don't know where I was that day. I honestly, I don't know if anyone, not that you should be able to give me a clue, but if anyone can give me any hints about what that means. A lot of factors go into our reporting accuracy and what we say and experience. And again, I come back, I don't think this was the point of the show, but we're hardwired for bias. And so we got to take measures to make sure that we report as accurately as we can. We got to take measures to record our results in detail, both in written form as well as any kind of computerized form. Because stuff happens. I don't know how many of you are fishermen or women, but sometimes the fish just keep getting bigger. And as you tell the story repeatedly. And we've got to make sure we're reporting accurately. I'm sorry, guys, I do not remember that show. My biggest attended show, the Ketchum Bigfoot DNA study, controversies and questions. I tried to take a balanced approach, looking at some of the strengths and the weaknesses of Dr. Ketchum's work. Honestly, I think it was one of the initial questions in this show that I remember is, um, why all the criticisms of Dr. Ketchum's work? And I think honestly, to understand that, you've got to be pretty well versed in DNAs. You got to understand DNA research. You got to understand the steps involved that it takes to sequence a genome. It's not like they just throw a cell under the microphone and you got your genome. It's not that simple. It's a multi-step process, a multifactorial process. And, if you really want to understand the potential weaknesses or potential strengths, depending on your perspective of the Ketchum study, you need to understand DNA language. I also was critical of her chain of custody. Maybe it's just a standard in Sasquatch research because Darby Orcutt is doing the same thing, but only taking partial samples of your raw data, the hair in this case, and leave. Understandably, from an ownership perspective, the owner of the hair may want to retain it. But that turned out to be one of the big Achilles heels in Dr. Ketchum's study because each person submitting DNA data was allowed to keep some for themselves. And in my opinion, it's the researcher's responsibility to control their data, their raw data, totally. And if you don't collect all the DNA evidence they've got, all the hairs, you're literally and figuratively leaving hairs out there dangling. And in Dr. Ketchum's case, that came back to bite her in the Smaja incident, where he claims to have shot a baby Bigfoot, buried it, hid it. Later thought better of it, went back and got it. It was reduced to a carcass, held on to the carcass. Part of that carcass was submitted to Dr. Ketchum's study. But as time passes, people in the Bigfoot community get up in arms that this guy shot a Bigfoot, start talking about should he be prosecuted for shooting a Bigfoot because they seem human. So, having been allowed to maintain his evidence, he sent out another portion, or so the story goes, sent out another portion of what came to be known as the Smaja steak, Steak, like you eat a steak. He sent out another portion of that to a research laboratory, and lo and behold, it came back bare. And it kind of highlights the difficulty you can get into when, as an experimenter, as a primary investigator, you do not have and hold all the data and control what is done with it. But again, that seems to be the path. And this isn't criticizing Darby. Maybe there's a method behind his madness, but that's the path Darby's taking. On one level, understandable, because everybody wants to hold on to their Bigfoot hair and flesh. but creates potential problems on down the line. Scientific definitions, kind of, I've got a long list of definitions, not all of which were included on the show in the book. And so just on that show, I basically just talked about some key scientific definitions. Had a few shows where definitions were apart. The biggies, I think, being, fight, flight, confirmation bias, organismic bias, pareidolia, illusions. You got to know about this stuff. More definitions. The NAWAC tag study did a pretty good overview of that study and what I consider the strengths and the weaknesses of that study. Before I came across that study, I hadn't read any papers on Bigfoot that vaguely resembled a research paper. One of the complaints of the study is that they don't know if they found Bigfoot. They readily admit that in that study. They did repeated piloting tests of their tag to ensure that it had the best probability of tagging a Bigfoot rather than a bear, a bird, and other animals that it might get attached to. They really did an exhaustive effort there. They followed this tagged creature for, I think, about 10, 11 months with radio telemetry. I just found it overall to be a step in the right direction towards using more science and understanding both the length, the limitations, and the strengths of their study. In my opinion, they did an awesome job. In interpreting their data and not over-interpreting their data. Hey, Tinky, nice to see you, buddy. Did a two-parter on that. And here we are with another testament to how little my technical skills in the mechanics of putting out a show have come. Episode 31, I'm still saving over thumbnails, so I didn't have the thumbnail for 31, but it was on the tree nux study. I've talked about that already a little bit, but again, similar to the tree structure study. Find an area where either only Sasquatch are going to be around, or the possibility of humans being around are very, very minimal. Preferably an area where they're not around. Make some tree knocks. Record how many knocks you made that got a response, and record how many knocks you made that didn't get a response. Go to a human area. Do the same thing. Where do you get the most tree knocks back? Wouldn't it be something if we get more tree knocks back in the human area than the Sasquatch area? What do those tree knocks mean? We've got a lot of conjecture out there what they mean. I think some people have written books on the language of Sasquatch, or at least papers. I think we're a ways off there before we can reliably interpret what a tree knock means. Although I know there are people out there that would fight me tooth and nail on that opinion, and it is only an opinion. We haven't done any scientific research on tree knocks. What's the average number of tree knocks a Bigfoot makes in response? What's the average number of tree knocks we make before we get a response to Bigfoot? There are lots of questions that we don't understand about tree knocks and what tree knocks mean. Science will help. Then we talked about that tree knock study, and I introduced the normal curve in a more in-depth fashion. The normal curve, until you learn to do a t-test or a z-test on your data, until you learn to do statistical analysis on your data, the normal curve is your friend. It'll help you interpret research on apes, great apes, and other potential relations to Sasquatch if you're a flesh and blood evolutionary type. I'm blocking right now on the name of the researcher, but it's been shown that Bigfoot's foot size exists on the normal curve. Still have bigger feet than I, but the distribution between, or not I, but us, but the distribution of the size of the feet is identical to ours proportionately. So many percent have below average, so many have average, and certain percents have above average, very close to the kind of the human pattern. Doesn't mean their feet aren't bigger than ours overall, but they still exist on the normal curve. But reading literature from other areas other than Bigfoot, when they start talking about significant findings and test results and percentiles, that's all on that normal curve image that I gave you guys. Just caught a question from Jessica. Isn't that where I said have a group that does no knocks and just listens? You know, one of the big problems, Jessica, with Bigfoot research is there is no normative data. We don't know what's normal. Like I said earlier, what's normal? A 1-knock tree knock from a Bigfoot, a 2-knock tree knock from a Bigfoot, a 3-knock tree knock from Bigfoot. You know, we don't know how frequently Bigfoot normally knocks. So a just listening group, part of the research that needs to be done is going into these areas and camping and not doing a darn thing except recording the frequency of the tree knocks you hear. You got to have a normative database. Use the normal curve and that normal curve image that I've put out there. Minimize or maximize pareidolia and Bigfoot research. Like I said, I was on Nikki Colin's show last night talking about this. The research techniques you use will determine whether you're increasing your chance of misidentification through pareidolia or decreasing or increasing your chance of getting pareidolia findings. I said it on my show. I said it on Nikki's yesterday. Say it again. You want to find a Bigfoot when there's not one there? Stand at a distance from a tree line. take a picture of that tree line in the shadows. Or even better yet, stand in the middle of an open field with trees surrounding it and slowly spin in a 360-degree circle and take a photo frame of each aspect of that entire tree line 360 degrees around you. And then study it close. You will find a Bigfoot, whether it's real or not. You got to start thinking about that. And again, I've harped on it enough. Audio. I mean, do we necessarily know that it's wood that's knocking and that it's them that's maybe a bigger sound signature that we can't recognize and we're only getting the knock sound? Awesome question, bud. Awesome question. There's a growing number of people who don't believe it's actually wood on wood. I recently had a conversation with somebody who had a face-to-face encounter at a relatively close distance and tells me that the Bigfoot made the tree knock sound right in front of him, visibly. You know how the Bigfoot made it? Clicked its tongue. And there are larger and larger numbers of people kind of coming down on it's not a stick hitting the a tree. Vestige bellows within their body that they can use to produce the sound and magnify the sound, using their hands as a megaphone and clacking their teeth, clicking their tongue. Again, we've been calling them tree knocks for how long? We don't even know if they're tree knocks or not. The tree knock, the only tree knock made by what I believe was a Bigfoot that I ever heard, sure sounds like a home run shot bat out of the park. But it's far from a investigated or conclusive opinion about how they make tree knocks, unless of course you've seen them make them. Good friend Janice Carter, who, if you haven't read her book 50 Years of Living with Bigfoot, Tennessee Chronicles, written by her and Mary Green, you can listen to it on YouTube for free if you find the right one. She tells me she's witnessed a Bigfoot making a tree knock. And I think there are some things that have, Doug on his show has been talking a lot about the thunder knock. My friend Glenn Williams experienced a tree knock that he said sounded like they pulled a massive tree out of the ground and then hit that massive tree against another tree to make their tree knock. It was so loud. So I think there may be limited. My own opinion is there may be some limited instances where a tree knock is made with wood, but I think there's increasing beliefs that it's not wood, it's made in some other fashion. And I think we got to be open to all those possibilities for what it's worth. Minimizing, power maximizing. So taking pictures where you haven't seen a Bigfoot is a good way to find a Bigfoot within using pareidolia. If you're looking for attention, excitement, belonging to a group, peer recognition, intentionally taking pictures in a fashion that you know is likely to yield pareidolia, will get you lots of attention. If you're a serious researcher, be it doing observational research or taking the plunge into experimental and statistical analytical research, pareidolia is a big problem, and you got to control for it and rule it out. And then the last show was on hunting and trapping versus scientific Sasquatch research. Are they different processes? Not much of a difference between hunting and trapping and the current research model in Bigfoot. In fact, hunters and trappers may be more rigorous in that they typically, especially hunting and trapping guides and fishing guides, are now entering all their catches into these databases that they can then statistically analyze according to the time of year, weather conditions, water conditions. They can use this information to know where to go to fish and catch fish and increase their likelihood of fishing. Current model of research, I think most of the whiteboards that record the findings are snapshot is taken and sent to someone else in a group where it's maintained. And to the best of my knowledge, that's as far as it goes. That's got to change. So I think they are the same process, and maybe hunting and trapping is even a little bit, as a guide, hunting and trapping is even a little bit more rigorous than our current model of Bigfoot research. But I've been hawking my bias and my concept of scientific Sasquatch research. And I hope you guys will consider taking a harder look, investing some time and energy in learning how to do statistical analysis. Because if we're going to prove it without killing one or two or three, we're going to have to do numbers and experimentation, guys. It's not fun, not easy, but we got to make that shift if we're going to find the scientific proof. That's about it. I've enjoyed it. Enjoyed meeting all you guys. Appreciate your interest. Look for Grasping Sasquatch, the book. If you've attended this show and you see me at a conference, probably in 2006 or 2026 at the earliest at this point, please come and say hello. Introduce yourself. I'm pretty accessible. Hope you guys get out in the woods. And as always, I'm going to ask you, and thank you so much for your participation in this series. As always, I'm going to ask you to keep your mind open, your boots on the ground, and your heart with your highest power. God bless you and thank you. Signing off.
why you wanna walk away. When we began, swear we had something that would last. Baby has a feeling best. Falling in was easy, how do I make it stay? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Tried and true. Was I a fool? I know sometimes I may wonder, but I would never leave asunder a thing as good as what we have. Is it a rule? What's good is worth the fighting. There ain't no denying that you and I were made to last. Falling in was easy, how can we make it stay? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Tried and true. I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. I'll never let go of you. Tried and Have you had a change of heart? Can we go back to the start? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. I'll never let go of you. Tried and true.
You by my side, if you're in, meet me here tonight.